She smiled at him like she loved him, but beneath that smile, she had buried his sister alive. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Today's special shout-out goes to Mary Gates, watching all the way from California. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout-out in my next video. Adrian Blake stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 20 stories above the city that had made him a legend by 28. Outside, the skyline glittered with ambition, steel and glass monuments to power, wealth, and control. Inside, he felt none of those things. 3 weeks. 21 days since Lila had vanished. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, hollow-eyed despite the expensive suit, the perfect grooming, the aura of command that usually preceded him into every room. Adrian Blake, the ruthless tech billionaire. The man who dismantled failing companies before breakfast and rebuilt empires by lunch. The youngest CEO to grace the cover of Forbes 3 years running. None of it mattered. Not when his sister was gone. Adrian. Vivian's voice floated across the office like silk, soft and soothing. Darling, you haven't touched your coffee. He turned to find her framed in the doorway of his home office. A vision in cream cashmere that complemented her porcelain skin and cascading auburn hair. Vivian Ashford, former model, philanthropist, the woman who had somehow seen past his reputation and found the man beneath. His fiancée. The one person keeping him tethered to sanity while everything else spun out of control. I know, he said, managing a weak smile. Just thinking. She crossed to him with practiced grace, her heels silent on the Persian rug. When she reached him, she placed one perfectly manicured hand on his chest, right over his heart. The 4-carat engagement ring caught the morning light, throwing tiny rainbows across the dark wood of his desk. You can't keep doing this to yourself, Vivian murmured, her green eyes wide with concern. The police are doing everything they can. Detective Morrison said that they have no leads. Adrian's jaw tightened. That Lila vanished without a trace. No witnesses. No evidence. No anything. She probably just needed space, Vivian suggested gently, though they both knew how hollow that sounded. You said yourself she'd been stressed about her gallery opening. Maybe she. Lila wouldn't do that. Adrian pulled away, pacing to his desk. She wouldn't disappear. Not like this. Not without telling me. 21 years separated them, but they'd been inseparable since their mother's death 10 years ago. Lila was the only person who knew him before the billions, before the reputation, before Vivian. She was vibrant, fearless, full of life and laughter, everything good that existed in the Blake family legacy. And now she was just gone. The Blake mansion had felt wrong ever since. Adrian returned to the estate that evening as dusk painted the sky in shades of blood orange and purple. The mansion rose from its hilltop perch like something from another era, 3 stories of limestone and marble, surrounded by manicured gardens that sprawled across 5 acres. His grandfather had built it in the 1940s, and it had housed 3 generations of Blakes, each adding their own layer of history to its walls. Now it felt like a mausoleum. The staff had assembled in the grand foyer when he entered, as they always did, a remnant of old-world formality his grandmother had insisted upon. But tonight, their usual efficiency seemed strained. The tension was palpable, threading through the air like smoke. "Good evening, Mr. Blake," Charles, the aging butler, intoned with a slight bow. Behind him, the household staff stood in a loose semicircle. The cook, the gardeners, the maids. All of them looking anywhere but directly at him. All except Clara. She stood at the end of the line, her gray uniform pressed and spotless, her steel-colored hair pulled back in its customary bun. Clara had been with the family for 15 years, hired when Lila was just 6 years old. She'd been more nanny than maid in those early years, teaching Lila to braid her hair and read bedtime stories when their mother grew too weak from illness to leave her bed. Clara's dark eyes met his, and in them, Adrian saw something he hadn't seen in anyone else, knowing. Not pity. Not the careful sympathy everyone else offered. Something sharper. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck prickle. "Thank you, Charles," Adrian said. "Everyone, please, go about your evening." The staff dispersed like water, flowing into corridors and disappearing behind service doors. Only Clara lingered for a moment, her gaze flicking toward the grand staircase where Vivian was descending, one elegant hand trailing along the banister. Then Clara was gone too, vanishing into the shadows of the East Wing. Dinner was a quiet affair. Vivian had insisted on keeping up appearances, maintaining the routines even in Lila's absence. "Structure," she'd said, "will help us all cope." So they sat in the formal dining room beneath the crystal chandelier that had witnessed 4 generations of Blake family meals, picking at roasted duck and asparagus while conversation died stillborn between them. "I spoke with my father today," Vivian said, cutting her meat with surgical precision. "He wanted to offer his support. He mentioned that his friend Senator Whitmore has connections at the FBI. "The FBI already said they can't get involved," Adrian interrupted. "Missing adult. No evidence of foul play. She's not a priority. Still, it couldn't hurt to. I don't want your father's political connections." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. He set down his fork, suddenly nauseous. "I want my sister back." Vivian's face fell, hurt flickering across her delicate features. "I'm just trying to help." "I know. I'm sorry." Adrian reached across the table, taking her hand. The ring pressed cold against his palm. "I didn't mean to snap. I can't eat. I'm going to check the grounds. It's dark. I need the air." He left before she could protest further, grabbing a jacket from the hall closet and stepping out into the cool evening. The gardens sprawled before him, lit by ornamental fixtures that cast pools of golden light across the walking paths. Beyond them, the property dissolved into darkness, acres of woods that bordered the estate. Lila loved these gardens. She'd spent hours out here as a teenager, reading beneath the old oak or painting by the fountain. The gallery opening that never happened was supposed to feature a series inspired by these very grounds. Adrian followed the stone path toward the fountain, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The night was quiet except for the burble of water and the distant hum of the city below the hill. Peaceful. Too peaceful. Something crunched beneath his shoe. He looked down to find a scattering of loose soil across the path, out of place on the normally immaculate walkway. His groundskeeper, Marcus, was meticulous about maintaining every inch of these gardens. Adrian crouched, running his fingers through the dark earth. Fresh. Recently disturbed. "Mr. Blake." He jerked upright to find Clara emerging from the shadows near the rose garden, a flashlight in her hand. She wore a cardigan over her uniform now, her breath misting in the cool air. "Clara, what are you doing out here?" "I could ask you the same thing, sir." Her voice was soft but steady. "It's late. Couldn't sleep." He gestured at the soil. "Have you noticed anything unusual in the gardens lately? Disturbed areas, maybe?" Something flickered in Clara's expression, gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Why do you ask?" "Just the soil. It seems out of place." Clara's gaze dropped to the path, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. When she looked back at him, her eyes held that same knowing quality from earlier. "Mr. Blake, may I speak candidly?" "Of course. I've been with this family for 15 years. I watched Miss Lila grow from a child into a remarkable young woman." Clara's voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around the flashlight. "And in all those years, I've learned to pay attention. To the small things. The details others might miss." Adrian's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when someone you love goes missing, you look for signs. Patterns. Changes." Clara's beam of light swept across the garden, catching on something near the edge of the fountain. And when you spend every day in a place, you notice when things are wrong. Clara. 3 nights ago, I heard something while I was closing the kitchen for the evening. The sound from outside, faint, like scratching. Or crying. She met his eyes. I told myself it was an animal. A cat, maybe, or a raccoon in the woods. Adrian felt ice slide down his spine. And 2 nights ago, I found soil on the carpet in the east hallway. The same hallway that leads to Miss Vivian's dressing room. Clara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Yesterday, I noticed Miss Lila's favorite necklace, the silver one with the sapphire your mother gave her, in Miss Vivian's jewelry box. She said Miss Lila had lent it to her before she disappeared. The world seemed to tilt. Lila would never lend that necklace. It was Mom's. I know, sir. They stood in the darkness, the fountain burbling cheerfully behind them, while the implications hung heavy in the air between them. Adrian's mind raced, trying to connect dots he couldn't quite see, fighting against the instinct to dismiss what Clara was suggesting as impossible. Vivian. His fiancée. The woman he loved. It was insane. Clara, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not asking you to believe me, Mr. Blake. Clara's voice remained calm, almost apologetic. I'm asking you to notice. That's all. Just pay attention. She turned then, disappearing back into the shadows of the mansion, leaving Adrian alone with the disturbed soil and questions that multiplied like cancer. Inside, Vivian waited in the drawing room, curled into the corner of the cream sofa with a glass of wine and a book. She looked up when he entered, her smile immediate and warm. Feel better? A bit. Adrian crossed to the bar, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch he didn't really want. His hands felt unsteady. Clara was out in the gardens. Was she? Vivian's tone was light, disinterested. That woman works too hard. I keep telling her to delegate more to the junior staff. She mentioned hearing something a few nights ago. Some kind of sound from outside. Probably an animal. Vivian turned a page without looking up. This house makes all sorts of noises at night. You know that. Adrian studied her profile, the elegant line of her nose, the delicate curve of her mouth. The woman he'd fallen in love with 18 months ago at a charity gala, who'd laughed at his terrible jokes and called him out on his workaholic tendencies. Who'd fit so perfectly into his world, his life, his family. Who wore his ring. Vivian, he said carefully, do you have Lila's sapphire necklace? She looked up then, her green eyes wide and innocent. What? Oh, yes, actually. Lila lent it to me before she left. She said it would go perfectly with my dress for the Bennett Foundation dinner. Her brow furrowed with concern. But, is something wrong? No. I just didn't remember her mentioning it. She probably didn't want to bother you with such a small thing. You know how thoughtful she is. Vivian set down her book, rising to cross to him. She cupped his face in both hands, her touch feather-light. Adrian, darling, I know this is torture. But we have to have faith. Lila will come home. She kissed him softly, tasting of wine and promises. And Adrian, standing in his family's drawing room with his fiancée in his arms and his sister missing and dirt on the garden path, felt the first cold finger of doubt trace down his spine. Because Clara was right. He hadn't been paying attention. But he would now. That night, Adrian Blake lay awake in bed while Vivian slept soundly beside him, and thought about all the small things he'd dismissed. The way Lila had seemed uneasy around Vivian in those last few weeks. The argument he'd heard through closed doors but hadn't asked about. The times he'd chosen his fiancée's version of events over his sister's concerns. He thought about Clara, steady, observant Clara, who had spent 15 years protecting his sister in ways he'd never fully appreciated. And he thought about the gardens and the disturbed soil and sounds in the night that might not be animals at all. Somewhere in the darkness of the Blake mansion, secrets were breathing, waiting. And time, Adrian realized with growing horror, was running out. Morning came with the kind of sharp clarity that follows sleepless nights. Adrian stood at his bathroom mirror, razor in hand, watching his own reflection blur and sharpen with exhaustion. Beside him, Through the open door, Vivian sat at her vanity in a silk robe, applying makeup with the precision of a portrait artist. "I thought we could have lunch at Le Bernardin today," she said, meeting his eyes in her mirror. "Get you out of the house." The detective said dwelling on things won't help. Adrian rinsed his razor, the water running pink. "When did you talk to Detective Morrison?" "Yesterday afternoon. While you were at the office." Her tone remained light, casual. "He called with an update, or rather, the lack of one. I didn't want to upset you with more dead ends." There it was again. That careful management of information, wrapped in concern. Adrian had appreciated it before, her way of shielding him from additional stress. Now, Clara's words echoed in his mind. "Pay attention." "I'd prefer to hear these things directly," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Vivian's hand paused mid-application, a mascara wand hovering near her lashes. "Of course, I was only trying to help." A beat of silence. "You seem different this morning. Distant. Just tired. You were restless last night, tossing and turning." She turned on her stool to face him, her expression soft with concern. "Adrian, I'm worried about you. This obsession isn't healthy. Maybe Dr. Rothstein could prescribe something to help you sleep." "I don't need medication. I need my sister." The words came out harder than intended. Vivian flinched, and immediately Adrian felt the familiar pull of guilt. She was trying, being patient with his grief, supportive through the uncertainty. Why was he pushing her away? Because Lila would never have lent that necklace. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. I'll try to rest today." Vivian's smile returned, warm and forgiving. "That's all I ask." She rose, crossing to him, and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "I'll have Clara bring you breakfast in the study. Something light." She glided from the room in a cloud of expensive perfume, and Adrian stood alone, wondering when he'd started noticing how thoroughly she controlled the small details of his life. The mansion seemed to breathe differently during daylight hours. Staff moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, the soft pad of footsteps, the whisper of cloth, the distant clink of silver and china. Adrian descended the main staircase to find Charles directing two younger maids in the foyer, their voices low and urgent before they spotted him and fell silent. "Mr. Blake," Charles said, his composure instantly restored. "Good morning, sir." "Charles." Adrian paused on the landing. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong, sir?" "No, simply coordinating the day's tasks." But the butler's gaze flickered to the maids, who'd already scurried toward the east wing. Adrian had known Charles for 20 years. The man had a tell when he was uncomfortable, a slight tightening around his eyes. It was there now, pronounced. "The staff seems on edge," Adrian said carefully. Charles hesitated, weighing his words. "The household has been strained, sir, since Miss Lila's disappearance. We all care for her deeply." "Of course." Adrian descended the remaining steps. "Charles, have you noticed anything unusual? Anything out of place?" "Unusual, sir?" "Things moved. Sounds at night. Anything that doesn't fit the normal pattern." The butler's discomfort deepened. "If you're asking whether the staff has concerns..." He trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Some have mentioned feeling uneasy around Miss Ashford. Nothing specific, you understand. Just a general disquiet." Adrian's pulse quickened. "What kind of disquiet?" "She can be quite particular about her preferences. Controlling, some might say, though I wouldn't presume." "I'm asking you to presume, Charles. This is important." The older man drew a breath. "She monitors the staff's movements rather closely. Questions where we've been, what we've heard, who we've spoken with. She's dismissed 2 maids in the past month for what she termed gossip. The remaining staff have learned to be cautious around her." The information landed like stones in Adrian's stomach. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Miss Ashford is to be your wife, sir. It wasn't our place to interfere in your personal affairs." Charles's expression softened with something like apology. "Though perhaps we should have." Adrian found Clara in Lila's room. He'd been walking the halls, restless and thinking, when he noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Clara knelt beside Lila's bed, one hand pressed to the hardwood floor as if feeling for something beneath the surface. "Clara?" She jerked upright, startled. For a moment, guilt flashed across her face before composing itself. "Mr. Blake. The floor creaks here. I thought perhaps a board had come loose." But her other hand, Adrian noticed, clutched a small leather journal. "What's that?" Clara's fingers tightened around the book. "I found it beneath Miss Lila's mattress. I was changing the linens and—" She held it out, reluctant. "Perhaps you should read it." The journal was worn, the kind Lila had carried everywhere in her teenage years, filling pages with sketches and observations. Adrian's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The entries were dated, the last one from 2 days before Lila disappeared. "Cornered me in the garden today. Said I needed to stop interfering in her relationship with Adrian. That I was making things difficult with my concerns." The way she looked at me, it wasn't anger. It was calculation. Like she was measuring me for a coffin. I told Adrian about it later. He said I was overreacting, that V was just stressed about the wedding planning. But I saw her face when he said that. She was pleased. Pleased that he didn't believe me. I don't know what to do. If I push harder, Adrian will just pull further away. But if I do nothing, there's something wrong with her. Something missing behind those perfect smiles. And I'm terrified of what she's capable of. The entry ended there. Adrian's vision blurred. "There's more," Clara said quietly. "Turn to the back." He flipped to the final pages and found a sketch, rough, quickly done. It showed a section of the garden, with an X marked near the old fountain. Beside it, Lila had written 3 words in frantic scrawl. "She's planning something." Adrian's hands went numb. "When did you find this?" "This morning. I've been searching Miss Lila's room for days, looking for anything the police might have missed." Clara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mr. Blake, there's something else. Last night, after we spoke, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for tea and I heard that sound again, the scratching, crying sound. It came from the east side of the house. The gardens. Yes. But when I looked out, I saw Miss Ashford there. In the dark, alone. She was standing near the fountain, just staring at the ground. The room felt airless. Adrian forced himself to breathe, to think through the panic rising in his chest. "You think Vivian—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't make the words real. "I think Miss Lila knew something was wrong," Clara said. "And I think we need to find out what Miss Ashford was hiding. Before it's too late." Adrian looked down at the journal in his hands, at his sister's desperate handwriting, and felt the last threads of his denial snap. "The fountain," he said. "The disturbed soil. The X on the map." Clara nodded, her face pale but determined. "There's one more thing." She reached into her apron pocket and withdrew something small and brass. A key, old and tarnished, attached to a tag with ornate script. "I found this in Miss Ashford's dressing room, hidden in a hatbox. Look at the tag." Adrian took it, his hands shaking. The tag read, "Garden Vault, East Access." His world tilted. "We don't have a garden vault." "No," Clara said softly. "We don't. But someone does." In the drawing room below, Vivian Ashford smiled at her phone, reading a text from the wedding planner about flower arrangements. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The venue was booked. The guest list finalized. In 3 months, she would be Mrs. Adrian Blake, with access to everything she'd worked so meticulously to obtain. She thought briefly of the girl buried beneath the garden, weak now, probably running out of air and hope. A necessary sacrifice. Adrian had been too devoted to his sister, too easily swayed by her concerns. Lila had to go. Vivian had planned it perfectly. And no one suspected a thing. Or so she believed. The clock in Lila's bedroom read 2:47 a.m. when Clara made her decision. She'd waited until the mansion fell into that particular silence that only comes in the dead hours, when even the old house's usual creaks and sighs seemed to hold their breath. Adrian had retired to his study hours ago, unable to face sleeping beside Vivian. The staff had long since retreated to their quarters. And Vivian herself had taken a sleeping pill, or so she'd announced at dinner, complaining of stress-induced insomnia. Clara didn't believe her, but she couldn't wait any longer. The brass key felt heavy in her palm as she slipped through the kitchen door into the garden. She dressed in dark clothes, black slacks and a navy cardigan, and carried only a small flashlight, keeping the beam pointed at the ground. The night air was cold enough to see her breath, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, lonely and ominous. The fountain loomed ahead, its cherub centerpiece casting twisted shadows in the moonlight. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the spot marked with an X in Lila's sketch. During the day, she'd memorized the location, a section of garden just east of the fountain where the ornamental grasses grew thick and wild. Please let me be wrong, she prayed. Please let this be paranoia. But as her flashlight swept across the ground, she saw it, fresh soil, darker than the surrounding earth. And beneath the grass, partially obscured by careful landscaping, the edge of something metal. Clara dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she pushed aside the vegetation. A hatch. Iron, old, maybe 3 feet square, with a lock that looked recently oiled. The key in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She was about to insert it when she heard it. A sound. Faint. Muffled. Like someone crying underground. "Oh God," Clara whispered. "Oh God, no." The key slid into the lock with a soft click that seemed deafening in the silence. Clara's fingers fumbled with the mechanism, her breath coming in short gasps. The lock resisted, then gave. The hatch lifted with a groan of protesting metal. Darkness yawned below. And from that darkness came a voice, cracked, desperate, barely human. "Please, please, someone. Miss Lila." Clara's voice broke. "Miss Lila, it's Clara. I'm here." A sob echoed up from the vault. "Clara? Clara, is it really?" "Hush now, sweetheart. I need you to be quiet for me." Clara aimed her flashlight down into the hole. A ladder descended into blackness, maybe 15 feet. "I'm coming down. Can you tell me if you're hurt?" "My ankle. I think it's broken. I'm chained to the wall. Clara, she's been keeping me here. She comes sometimes just to..." Lila's words dissolved into ragged breathing. "I thought I was going to die down here." Clara's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back. Tears wouldn't help. Action would. "You're not going to die. I promise you, child. Hold on." She descended the ladder, each rung slick with condensation. The smell hit her halfway down, damp earth, human waste, and something else. The scent of terror trapped in a confined space. The vault was exactly what it sounded like. A concrete box, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with walls that wept moisture. And huddled in the corner, illuminated by Clara's trembling flashlight beam, was Lila. The vibrant young woman Clara had helped raise was almost unrecognizable. Her hair hung in matted tangles. Her clothes, the same outfit she'd worn the day she disappeared, were torn and filthy. Her face was hollow, eyes too large, skin so pale it seemed translucent. A heavy chain ran from a bolt in the wall to a shackle around her ankle, which was swollen and discolored. "Oh, my sweet girl." Clara's voice cracked as she rushed forward. "What has she done to you?" Lila reached for her with shaking hands, and Clara pulled her into an embrace, feeling how thin she'd become, how she trembled like a wounded bird. "I tried to scream," Lila whispered against Clara's shoulder. "For days I screamed. But no one could hear me. She said no one would ever find me. That Adrian would forget and marry her and I would just disappear." "Never." Clara pulled back, cupping Lila's face in her hands. "Your brother has been tearing the world apart looking for you. Now, I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that?" Lila nodded, wiping at her eyes with filthy hands. Clara examined the shackle. Modern, with a combination lock rather than a key. "Do you know the combination?" "She never opened it in front of me." "Clara, we need to hurry. She comes down sometimes, late at night, to check." "I know, honey. I know." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't pick the lock, and bolt cutters would make too much noise. But the bolt in the wall, it was old, the concrete around it crumbling with age and moisture. Clara grabbed the chain and pulled, testing it. The bolt shifted slightly. "Help me," she said. On three, we pull together. 1, 2, 3. They hauled on the chain with everything they had. Lila cried out in pain as the movement jarred her ankle, but she didn't stop pulling. The bolt groaned, shifted, and then, with a crack of breaking concrete, came free. Yes. Clara helped Lila stand, taking most of her weight. Come on. Arm around my shoulders. We're going to climb out together. Getting Lila up the ladder was agonizing. Each rung was a small eternity of pain and effort, Lila biting back whimpers as her injured ankle dragged uselessly. Clara climbed backward, supporting her weight, muscles screaming with exertion. They were halfway up when Clara heard it, a sound from above. Footsteps on the garden path. She froze, her flashlight off, one arm locked around Lila's waist. In the darkness, Lila's breathing seemed impossibly loud, each gasp a betrayal. The footsteps came closer. Stopped. Hello. Vivian's voice, sleep-soft but alert. Is someone there? Clara pressed her face against Lila's hair, silently willing her to breathe quieter, to be invisible, to disappear into the shadows of the vault. Above them, Vivian's silhouette appeared at the edge of the hatch, backlit by the moon. For an endless moment, she stood there, looking, listening. Then her phone buzzed. She answered it with a soft curse. What? No, I'm in the garden, I couldn't sleep. Fine. Yes, tomorrow morning. She moved away, her voice fading. The caterer is being impossible about the menu changes. Clara didn't move until the sound of Vivian's footsteps disappeared entirely, until the kitchen door closed in the distance. Only then did she resume climbing, her arms shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. They emerged into the garden like souls rising from a grave. Clara eased Lila onto the grass, then quickly closed the hatch, scattering leaves and grass over it. Evidence could wait. Right now, survival mattered. Can you walk at all? Clara whispered. With help. Lila's teeth were chattering from cold or shock or both. They moved through the garden like ghosts, Clara supporting almost all of Lila's weight, taking the long route around to the servants' entrance to avoid passing the main windows. Every shadow seemed to hide Vivian. Every sound made Clara's heart stop. But they made it. Through the kitchen door, down the service corridor, into the small sitting room that adjoined Clara's quarters on the ground floor. Clara eased Lila onto the sofa, then locked the door behind them. You're safe now, Clara breathed, finally allowing herself to shake. You're safe. I'm going to get your brother. Lila grabbed her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Clara, thank you. If you hadn't... Hush now. Save your strength. Clara smoothed the hair back from Lila's forehead, the gesture automatic from years of caring for her. I'm going to get Mr. Blake. And then we're going to make sure that woman never hurts anyone again. Lila's eyes, still too large in her hollowed face, filled with tears. She's evil, Clara. Truly evil. She told me exactly what she'd do, how she'd take everything from Adrian, from our family. How she'd been planning it for years. She enjoyed telling me. Enjoyed watching me realize no one was coming. Well, someone did come. Clara's voice hardened with a rage she'd never known she possessed. And now she's going to pay. Adrian was still in his study when Clara found him, Lila's journal open on his desk, his head in his hands. He looked up at the soft knock, and the expression on Clara's face, relief mixed with something fierce and triumphant, made him surge to his feet. Clara? What? She's alive. The words came out choked. Mr. Blake, Miss Lila is alive. She's in my sitting room. She needs you. For a moment, Adrian couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to those 4 impossible words. She's alive. Then he was running. He burst through the door to Clara's quarters to find his sister curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, looking like something pulled from a grave. Her hair was matted with dirt. Her face was gaunt, bruised. But her eyes, those eyes he'd thought he'd never see again, found his, and she smiled. Adrian, Lila whispered. He was on his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that belied the violence of his shaking. Lila. Oh God, Lila. The words broke on sobs he couldn't control. Where were you? How? Vivian. Lila's voice was rough, damaged from days of screaming. She buried me. Underground. In the garden. She's been planning this for months, Adrian. Everything, the engagement, the wedding, getting close to our family. It was all calculated. She wanted me gone so she could control you. Control everything. Adrian pulled back, his hands framing her face, needing to see her, to confirm she was real. The rage that rose in him was unlike anything he'd ever felt, white-hot, murderous, barely contained. Where is she? His voice came out deadly calm. Upstairs. Asleep. Clara stood in the doorway, her expression grim. Mr. Blake, we need to call the police. No. Adrian stood, his jaw set. Not yet. First, she answers to me. Adrian, don't. Lila reached for him, but he was already moving toward the door. Stay with her, he told Clara. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Adrian climbed the stairs with the measured pace of a man walking toward an execution. His own, perhaps. Or Vivian's. At this moment, he genuinely didn't care which. The bedroom was dark, Vivian's form a shadow beneath silk sheets. She looked peaceful. Innocent. The woman he'd loved, or thought he'd loved, sleeping soundly while his sister had been buried alive 15 feet beneath the garden. He flicked on every light. Vivian stirred, one hand rising to shield her eyes. Adrian? What time is it? Why are you? Get up. Something in his tone made her freeze. She sat up slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to careful concern. Darling, what's wrong? Did something happen? I found her. The words hung in the air between them. For just a fraction of a second, so brief he might have imagined it, something cold and calculating flickered across Vivian's face. Then it was gone, replaced by perfect confusion. Found who? Adrian, you're not making sense. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't insult me by pretending. I found Lila. Clara pulled her out of the vault you put her in. Out of the ground, Vivian. You buried my sister alive. Vivian's face remained perfectly composed, but her hand tightened on the sheets. That's insane. Adrian, I think you need to. Stop lying. His shout echoed through the room. She told me everything. The planning, the manipulation, how you've been using me from the beginning. For a long moment, Vivian simply looked at him. Then, slowly her expression changed. The mask of concern dissolved, replaced by something else entirely. Something that made Adrian's blood run cold. She smiled. Well, she said, her voice losing its warmth, becoming clipped and precise. I suppose it was inevitable. Though I must say, I'm impressed with your housemaid. I didn't think the simpering fool had it in her. Adrian stared at the woman he'd planned to marry, seeing her clearly for the first time. No warmth. No love. Just calculation and contempt. Why? The question came out hoarse. Why would you do this? Vivian rose from the bed with liquid grace, wrapping a robe around herself. But, because your sister was in the way. She saw through me from the beginning, kept whispering her concerns in your ear, trying to turn you against me. You were already wavering. Another few months, and she would have succeeded in poisoning you against me completely. So you tried to kill her. I tried to remove an obstacle. Vivian's tone was matter-of-fact, discussing murder the way others might discuss removing a stain. Do you have any idea how much planning went into this? How carefully I cultivated our relationship? I spent 18 months becoming exactly what you needed, supportive, understanding, beautiful. I made myself indispensable. You made yourself a monster. I made myself rich. Vivian's eyes flashed. Or I would have been once we married. The prenup was solid, but widows inherit everything, Adrian. And you're so careless, all those late nights at the office, the private plane trips, the dangerous hobbies. Accidents happen to billionaires all the time. The casual way she discussed his planned murder made Adrian's vision blur with rage. You're insane. I'm practical. Vivian reached for her phone on the nightstand, but Adrian was faster, snatching it away. You're not calling anyone. Then what? She tilted her head, studying him. Are you going to hit me, Adrian? Rough me up? That's not very gentlemanlike. And imagine what the police will think when I tell them you attacked me because I discovered your guilty conscience about whatever happened to your sister. The police will believe Lila. They'll believe Clara. They'll believe the vault in our garden with your fingerprints all over it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vivian's face. Lila's been underground for 3 weeks. God knows what state her mind is in. She'll be incoherent, unreliable. And Clara? A housemaid's word against mine. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. I don't think so. You're wrong. The voice came from the doorway. They both turned to find Detective Morrison standing there, uniform officers behind him. And beside him, holding a phone with its camera pointed at Vivian, was Charles. We heard everything, Morrison said quietly. The whole confession. Ms. Ashford, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and attempted murder of Lila Blake. The color drained from Vivian's face. She looked at Adrian, then at the detective, then back at Adrian. You set me up. No. Adrian's voice was ice. I gave you a chance to tell the truth. You chose to brag about planning my murder instead. As the officers moved forward with handcuffs, Vivian's composure finally shattered. You're making a mistake. Adrian, please. I love you. Everything I did was because I love you. You don't know what love is, Adrian said. Get her out of my house. They led her away screaming, her voice echoing through the mansion until the front door closed and silence fell like a blessing. Adrian stood in the bedroom, their bedroom where he'd slept beside a murderer, and felt his legs give out. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his whole body shaking with reaction. Detective Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Blake, we'll need statements from you, your sister, and Clara. But that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight be with your family. Adrian nodded, not trusting his voice. The detective left, and Charles approached, his weathered face full of sympathy. Sir, Miss Lila has been asking for you. Adrian rose on unsteady legs and made his way back to Clara's sitting room. 3 months later, the Blake mansion felt different in the spring sunlight. The gardens, once a burial ground for secrets, bloomed with fresh plantings that Clara had personally overseen. The fountain had been relocated, the vault beneath filled and paved over. Some scars deserved to be buried. Adrian sat on the terrace, watching Lila paint at her easel, the first canvas she'd touched since her rescue. Her ankle had healed, though she still limped slightly. The psychological wounds ran deeper, but Dr. Rothstein, now treating both siblings, said she was making remarkable progress. It's beautiful, Clara said, appearing beside him with a tea tray. She set it down, her movements comfortable, natural. She's getting stronger every day. Adrian accepted a cup. Thanks to you. Clara's promotion to household manager had been his first act after Vivian's arrest. But more than that, he'd insisted she take her meals with the family, join them for holidays, be treated as what she'd always been, someone who loved them enough to risk everything. I only did what needed doing, Clara said quietly. You saved her life. You saved both our lives. Adrian looked at her. I'll spend the rest of mine trying to repay that debt. There is no debt, Mr. Blake. Only love. Lila approached, wiping paint from her hands. She looked healthier now, still thin, still carrying shadows in her eyes, but present in a way she hadn't been for weeks after the rescue. What do you think? She turned the canvas toward them. It showed the garden, but transformed. Where the fountain had been, she'd painted a tree, massive, strong, its roots visible beneath the surface. And in those roots, tiny figures of 3 people holding hands. A family, connected beneath everything, unshakable. It's called The Things That Hold Us, Lila said softly. Because I learned something down there, in the dark. The things we think define us, money, beauty, power, they're not what matter. What matters is the people who come for us when we're buried. The people who refuse to stop digging. Adrian pulled his sister close, feeling Clara's hand rest gently on his shoulder. In the weeks after Vivian's arrest, he'd learned hard truths about trust, about the masks people wear, about how easily charm can disguise evil. He'd started therapy, examining his own blind spots, his willingness to dismiss concerns in favor of comfort. But he'd also learned about courage, about the quiet heroism of observation, about the strength found in the most unexpected places. The mansion had been a place of fear and deception. Now, with Vivian facing life in prison and the family beginning to heal, it was becoming something else. A home. A sanctuary. A place where vigilance and love existed side by side, where the lessons learned in darkness illuminated everything that came after. "Clara," Adrian said, "thank you. For seeing what I couldn't. For never giving up." The older woman's eyes glistened. "That's what family does, Mr. Blake. We save each other." And standing there in the spring sunshine, with his sister alive and his eyes finally open, Adrian Blake understood that the greatest wealth he possessed had nothing to do with money. It was the people who loved him enough to tell him the truth, even when he didn't want to hear it. Especially then. Sometimes the most dangerous threats come wrapped in charm and beauty. Sometimes the greatest courage comes from the quietest voices. And sometimes, salvation comes not from power or wealth, but from someone who simply refuses to look away from the truth, no matter how deeply it's been buried. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.